Well, I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Paul Davidson, who is the president of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, AUCC. Paul Davidson was appointed president of AUCC in May 2009, and I understand from the website that your term has been extended to 2017. This year, AUCC marks its 100th anniversary as the voice of Canada's universities. AUCC has been instrumental in public policy development in higher education and research for 10 decades. In addition to advancing the mission of higher education and research in Canada, AUCC plays a leading role in internationalizing Canada's campuses. Prior to joining AUCC, Mr. Davidson was the executive director of World University Service of Canada, or WUSC, an international development agency active on 70 campuses across Canada and in 17 countries overseas. At WUSC, Mr. Davidson led the development of strategic partnerships with the Centre for International Studies and Cooperation and for Farm Radio International, which many of us at Guelph are very familiar with. Mr. Davidson has held senior positions in Canadian book publishing, including 5 years as executive director of the Association of Canadian Publishers. Mr. Davidson also served as political advisor to the Leader of the Opposition, to the Treasurer, and to the Deputy Premier at Queen's Park. Mr. Davidson holds an MA from Queen's University in Kingston, where he studied Southern African history, and a BA from Trent University, where he was in the first class of the Trent International Program. I welcome.
It is always fabulous to come to Guelph. It is always energizing, and one of the first reasons is that students are always integrated from the beginning. And so much of my time is spent in Ottawa, gray, drab, PowerPoint-driven Ottawa. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. I do not have a PowerPoint. I also want to just highlight right off the top how impressed I am with Guelph's work in international development, in volunteer commitment, in community-engaged scholarship, and in programs like the first-year seminars. I mean, Guelph is really a leader, and I hope that everyone in this room takes pride in what you're achieving today and every day. And after a presentation like that, just imagine what's going to come next. So now comes the hard part, because one of the elements of my career that wasn't mentioned is that over the last 5 or 6 years, I have a habit of having to follow Alistair Summerlee. So I do not have a PowerPoint, I do not have beautiful images, I have a few pieces of paper, but it is proof that I actually wrote these remarks myself. I'm so excited about this project that you're undertaking today and for years to come. It's really another example of Guelph showing strong leadership. And more than that, I'm excited because it personally combines my deeply held beliefs and passions about what universities can be. First of all, that education transforms the lives of individuals, communities, and nations. Secondly, that engaging youth from the beginning is critical to success in that endeavor. And finally, harnessing the knowledge that's created to serve a broader world. The introduction you provided me was very kind and very full, but let me tell you a couple of formative experiences in my background, just because people know me in some context, but when I'm at Guelph, I feel more comfortable to share a little more fully. So I'm not quite a child of the 60s. In 1968, I was 5 years old. It was the era of Trudeau-mania in Canada. So my twin brother and I took 4 Trudeau signs, hammered them together, built a go-kart, and took it on a parade to support a just society. By the age of 11, I was knocking on doors, canvassing people to encourage them to get out and to vote in the reform era of Toronto politics. And at a conference recently, it's actually a very good technique. I don't know if you've used it, Alistair, if others have seen it. Rather than have the standard introduction, they asked all the speakers to say, where were you when you were 18 and what were you passionate about? Really was an interesting exercise. So I'll share that with you today. When I was 18, I was involved in student politics in Toronto, and my issue was condoms in high school washrooms. As part of our tactic, we invited a public health nurse. She must have been 60. to come on to community-based cable access television, to do an open line show about sex and sexuality. Her name was Sue Johansson. Now, we did not get condoms in the washrooms, But Sue got a 20-year syndicated television program, and millions of Canadians have better access to health and sexual information. And then, not to belabor my background too much further, I was a fortunate beneficiary of an international education experience as a young person through Trent's international program. I was offered the chance to choose a university anywhere in the world to study for a year. This was way back in the early 80s. It was quite innovative then. It's quite common now. And I like to joke that I started my applications at Aberdeen and I got accepted at the University of Zimbabwe. And while I was in Zimbabwe in the early 80s, I was able to watch the crumbling, first of all, to watch the building of a new nation of Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, it's had a bitter history since. But I was also able to watch at firsthand the crumbling of apartheid. So what do all these early experiences illustrate about my interest in higher education and social change? I think what it shows is a passionate commitment to the linkages between humanities, arts, and culture to promote a social change agenda. And so the question is, how in the hell do you end up at AUCC? AUCC is 100 years old. It's a worthy Canadian institution. It's my normal presentation mode is in a suit and tie with 5 minutes to present before a parliamentary committee and only 3 messages to pound away. In fact, Alistair Summerlee actively discouraged me from taking on the job at AUCC. He thought I would be bored to death. But what I'm really excited about is that through that role, I've actually, I think, helped to play a catalytic role in getting Canada's universities to think differently about their place in Canadian society. And so in the last few years, we've had the opportunity to advance more seriously internationalization, to promote access to Aboriginal education, and also to renew our focus on the broader role of universities that this conference today is looking at. I do want to provide you a quick snapshot of some of the changes taking place on Canadian universities across the country to help situate what Guelph is undertaking. And I guess one of the messages I want to leave with you today is that universities are actually very dynamic institutions. The general public has a perception of universities as being static conservators of the status quo and resistant to change. But let's look at a few things that have changed recently across the Canadian higher education spectrum. First of all, university enrollment is up significantly. You know, there are 1 million undergraduate students in Canada today. That's a 57% increase in the last 15 years. So yes, classes are larger, if not classrooms. And there are struggles in terms of the operating budget. But that's a phenomenal success story, that we have a more accessible higher education system. In addition, we have over 100,000 international students studying alongside Canadians. That's a doubling in recent years. Turning from students, let's look at faculty. Canada's faculty, there are 6,000 net new jobs, net new full-time faculty positions in the last 15 years across Canada. Not enough, but a significant increase. And moreover, more than half of the people teaching in Canada's universities today were hired in the last 10 years. So there is a new generation of faculty who are engaged in this enterprise, and that's really encouraging. And then another element of dynamism in the Canadian higher education scene is the phenomenal investments that have been made in research. Research spending has quadrupled in the last 15 years. That's actually faster than the investments in public health. So yes, there are constraints on our abilities to operate day to day, and yes, that we could always use more resources. But in fact, there has been significant investment in higher education over the last decade. One of the things that's less known about the research agenda is that the health charities and broader civil society actually contributes $1 billion a year to research at Canadian universities. Now, most of that at this point, as I say, is health charity research, but it does include other forms of civil society engagement. So there are resources out there to be found and to partner with. And I make these points not only to say that universities are dynamic institutions, but to say that universities are emphatically not in the ivory tower. They are in community every day, working to solve problems of community and of nation.